Welcome to the RE/MAX Real Talks speaker series. I'm Charlie Bengal. It's my pleasure today to welcome Melanie McLane. Melanie is an active appraiser, broker, and educator, and does what she teaches. She's a graduate of Kenyon College and holds several designations. Melanie is a Real Estate Buyers Agent Council Hall of Fame instructor and lives and works in central Pennsylvania. In 2018, she was named Realtor of the Year by the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors. So Melanie, you may not be able to tell us who's going to get the electoral votes for Pennsylvania at this moment, but you're going to be able to educate us on appraisals and all things appraisals. So for our audience, feel free to ask questions in the chat box. Melanie's going to be monitoring that as she continues her presentation. Good morning, Melanie. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Good morning. It's lovely to be here. I'm glad we got on a little ahead of time because we had some glitches, which we ironed out. And I believe that the PowerPoint is going to be brought up now. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So this is the topic, and we don't need to spend a lot of time on that screen. If you would go to the next one. So, is your market on fire? So I call a market on fire one that has very low supply. Is this familiar? Very low interest rates, also very familiar. Very high demand. Now, one of the things that you have to recall, if you've not been in the business a long time, I've been in real estate since the BC era, which would be before computer. So the one thing I know is that it changes. A seller's market today is a buyer's market in a year or so, and it will just keep on doing that. So whatever you're going through now, sometimes it's painful, but it will change. So if you could go ahead and advance again. So here are our symptoms. Number one, very low supply, very short days on market. One of the things everyone who is pricing or appraising a property should look at is days on market. And I'm not talking listing to closing. I'm talking listing to contract. Multiple offers. Successful offer is generally over list price. Although we will talk about how offers are always price, terms, and conditions. Now, here's what happens. Sellers sometimes get greedy. So I've noticed in my own MLS, there have been some recent reductions. And those were sellers who heard how hot the market was. This is my opinion, and decided to be what I call aspirational. So yeah, the realtor said my house was worth 400, but what the heck, I'm going to try for 500. And after a time, they realized, okay, perhaps I overreached. Now, buyers get frustrated. I can't see you because it's a webinar, but if we were live together, I'd say, how many of you have a buyer who has lost a house? I know this summer, I finally closed with young first-time buyers, and it was the fourth offer we wrote when they finally got a house, and they did get a little frustrated. We hung in there. They got a house. Now, sometimes we get blamed. Now, I don't know of any real estate agent in the world who, if they had the ability to control a market, would not do so. I mean, wouldn't it be great if you could control the market, but we can't. Appraisers get blamed. And so, you know, I have two hats in my closet. I'm an appraiser and I'm a broker. So I see this from every side, and I know appraisers get blamed. But at the end of the day, folks, market data is what market data is. And we're ready for the next slide. Now, the thing you have to remember is one of the silliest questions people ask us because they don't know any better is, how's the market? Like the market is a homogeneous blob. The market is not a homogeneous blob. Some segments of the market behave differently than other segments. In most markets, if you're going to have a price range with longer days on market, it will be the absolute upper reaches of your market, because you've all seen the graphic of the pyramid, and some of you have used it perhaps in a listing presentation. It's an illustration we use to show sellers that at the low end of a range, it's the base of the pyramid, we got all kinds of people who are able to buy that house, might be interested in buying that house. But as we raise the price, we go up on those sides of the pyramid to we're at the very top and there's not a whole lot of people left. Well, that's typical for most markets, that your extreme high price range, you don't have as many buyers. The other thing is, and this is an appraisal thing I always talk about with pricing and valuation. So in every price range, in every market, you have what an appraiser calls typical purchaser expectations. What does that mean? It means that as we go up in price, people expect more for their house. So at the lowest price point in your market, whatever that may be, I'm sure it's higher than my price point in my market because I'm in rural Pennsylvania. But no matter my market or yours, at that entry level price, people don't expect a lot. 4 walls and a roof. They're not expecting high quality finishes. They're not expecting extra garages, or could be any garage. They're not expecting extra bathrooms, things like that. As we go up in price, people expect more. You have a point in your market, I don't know it, but you should, where a 2-car garage, for example, is no longer acceptable. Buyers in this price range expect a 3-car garage. So the differences in price ranges will affect supply and demand. And I always give as an example, you could have 2 sellers in the same market. And let's say they meet at a social event. And let's say seller A has a house in that great price range everybody wants. There's tons of buyers. He put it on the market. He sold it within 2 days. And let's say seller B has, number one, a unique home. Folks, unique almost always takes longer to sell. The more someone makes a home specific to what they want as opposed to what other people want. So let's say seller B has very unique home, very expensive home, has done custom finishes, has made it really to adapt to his or her specific needs. And it's been sitting there on the market because not everybody wants a 12-car garage and a bowling alley in the basement. So these 2 people meet at a social event and they start talking about houses, and seller A says, oh yeah, my agent sold my house in 2 days. I even got over list price. And seller B has been sitting there for 9 months and his house hasn't sold, or her house hasn't sold. And people being what they are, do you know what seller B says? Well, who's your agent? I got to get a hold of your agent because my house isn't selling and it's my agent's fault. It's not the agent's fault. You can't control the market, whatever is going on in that segment. So kind of keep that in mind. Let's go to the next slide. So we all have different roles, and it's really important to understand how we all have different roles. And I have been all 3 of these roles. So if I'm the seller's agent, I am working to get the seller the highest possible price and the best possible terms. Now, because I'm a real estate educator, I will wake up in the middle of the night thinking about agency, which is something normal, healthy people don't do. But I'm using that as an example. Single person disclosed dual agency is legal in my state. I don't ever do it because I don't think I can simultaneously try to get my seller that highest possible price, best terms for them, and get the buyer the lowest possible terms. And I'm going to tell you, as a seller agent, I've had sellers ask aspirational prices. I had a listing, I took it the seller's price. I never thought we'd sell it. Guess what? Somebody put in a full price contract. I was holding my breath and crossing my fingers till the appraisal came in. It came in, not my problem. Did I think probably the buyer paid too much? In my opinion, they paid too much, but I didn't represent that buyer, was not their agent, was doing my seller agent job. Now, if you're a buyer agent, this is a tough market because buyers want us to try to get them the lowest possible price. And in this market, I would expect many of you are finding you're negotiating just to get a chance to show the house and get an offer in. I heard in a class on negotiation I taught last week that there were agents, listing agents, who were arbitrarily cutting off the number of offers. I'm not real comfortable with that unless it would be absolutely at the direction of the seller. But at any rate, if you're a buyer agent, you are sometimes negotiating just to get in that house and then, of course, to write an offer. And in this market, many of you are telling your clients, we're not going to be able to get below list price. The big question is going to be how high above list price we're going to have to go to get you this house. So that's where you are with that. Now, the appraiser, they are working to produce credible results. And I underlined that. So credible results is a term out of USPAP. USPAP, Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. USPAP is embedded in every state appraisal law. So in my state and any other state, if an appraiser violates USPAP, they have also violated appraiser license law in their state, and they're in a world of trouble. So credible in USPAP means worthy of belief. So when I send a report into the lender, they've got to be able to read through it, look at it, and say, this is believable. I understand how she reached this conclusion. Now, the appraisals we're talking about today are the appraisals done as collateral for loans. And I have to tell you, my last thought before I hit send on an appraisal for lending purposes is this. If the lender has to foreclose on this house, if the buyer doesn't make the payments, do I believe the lender can sell that property for what I appraised it for? Because that's what they asked me to figure out. And all of those things are always in the back of the lender's mind, which is why so many things that happen or are reported in an appraisal can be a red flag for a lender and make them either reject the loan or be real uncomfortable about it. Let me give you one quick example. So one of the things appraisers always do as part of the Fannie Mae appraisal form is they report the age range and price range of a neighborhood. So let's just say an appraiser is in one of your neighborhoods and they say price range in this neighborhood is $400 to $450. If they come in at $500,000 on a house in that neighborhood, I guarantee you the underwriter is going to be calling them, emailing them, whatever, and saying, wait a minute, you've got a house that's outside the range of value for the neighborhood. That's a big red flag. That whole concept also plays out when we're listing homes. So I would expect many of you have heard what I've heard. And it's an old song, shall we say. Do you know what I could get for this house if it was located XYZ? Well, guess what? Location is fixed. You can't change your location. So if you're in a modest neighborhood and you have a very nice home and you're a seller and you think you ought to be able to compare your home to these other homes in neighborhoods with larger homes, newer homes, different price point, the appraiser's not going to do that because it's not going to be credible. It's going to be a red flag on the appraisal. So let's move forward to the next slide. We'll talk some more. So when I'm a seller's agent, first of all, I try to prepare a realistic CMA. Here's what the market data shows, because I know that's what the appraisers are going to look at. And I sometimes say to sellers, appraisers get in trouble for making up data, so they can't make up a comp. The comps are what they are. Then you have to advise the seller of market realities. So there may be people who are on this webinar who were in the real estate business from, let's just say, 2005 on. So the second quarter of 2006 was when we began the slide into the mortgage meltdown. That was the first quarter that the Case-Shiller index, which is an index of repeat sales of the same properties, reported a decline in value, which was really big news. Well, those of you who were in real estate then know what happened next. What happened next was we had a wave of foreclosures. We had a ton of inventory come on the market. It was absolutely a buyer's market. So I recall at that point in time, sitting with sellers who were finding out and being very unhappy about the fact that their mortgage value or mortgage payoff was above the current market value of their home because the market had shifted. Some of those sellers were in a position to just say, okay, I'm not going to sell now. I'll wait and do it another time. Not all sellers could. So we had sellers in that time frame who had to sell a property. It was an estate, job transfer, whatever. We had short sales, we had foreclosures, we had people who took losses. So sellers need to understand this is the market. I can't change it. Now, right now, what you're dealing with is all your sellers are hearing all the stuff in the media about how hot the market is. And that is translating for some of them to, I can get away with murder, which is not necessarily true. Now, something I still do every single time I take a listing, I say to my seller, what is your plan B? See, plan A is, I will sell my house. I will sell my house at my price. I will sell my house at my price in my time frame. That's everybody's plan A. Everybody wants to get their own way. But what is your seller's plan B? And they have to really think about that, because if they have to sell the property, then it's either a reduction, or if they can afford to rent it, they could rent it and do that. But, you know, this is the realities of the market. Now, the other thing is sometimes sellers will find themselves having to renegotiate price and terms after an appraisal. So I was involved in a transaction this summer. I was not the listing agent. I was the buyer agent. My buyers came in about $10,000 above list price. It was a multiple offer situation. The appraisal came back. It came in exactly at list price, which is a whole other story. I won't get into that one right now. My clients were prepared to bring more money to the table, but not $10,000 worth of more money. And we did negotiate where the seller gave some on the price and the buyer put more cash down. And so you do have to ask them that. We're also going to get into some of your specific situations with sellers and appraisals. So we're ready for the next slide. So buyer's agent, I want to prepare a realistic CMA. And one of the things I ask my buyers that I think we should all ask our buyers is, what is your anticipated tenure in this house? And the reason I ask that is it does make a difference. So the house that I sold where the buyer brought more cash and the seller came down somewhat, my buyer's game plan was, this is the home for probably the next 20 years. So yes, they were paying maybe above market value. I thought it was within the range, but they have a long time frame and they're both retired, so they're not going to get a job transfer, etc. Now, if you have a buyer who says, you know what, I take opportunities as they come. If I get a job offer in a better place or for more money or whatever, I may leave. Those folks have to be real careful, because we all know if you buy a house this year and pay all your closing costs and do all that stuff and turn around and sell it next year and pay closing costs again, you might end up being in the hole. So have the realistic CMA. Have the negotiation strategy for them. So I just taught the RENE course, Real Estate Negotiation Expert. Awesome course. It comes out of REBI. And I got to teach that live because there's a classroom in Bethlehem, Allentown, Pennsylvania, in a realtor association that's a huge classroom, and we could socially distance. So we had a really good time with that. But when you do negotiation, which, by the way, is one of the most valued things for us to do for consumers. In other words, when NAR polls buyers and sellers and asks them, what do you want your agent to do for you? Both of them list negotiation in their top 3 things of what they want us to do. So have a strategy. Now, in this market, your buyer needs to understand there may be no second chances. So I'm sure many of you have had a listing agent say to you, it's a multiple offer situation, bring me your highest and best. Now, next thing you're going to do, can you invest more money if you have to? The buyers in the scenario I described tapped into retirement savings, which they didn't want to do, but they were able to do. But this ties in with what's the walk-away price. They had a limit, and they had decided in advance, we will put this much additional money of our own into this, but we won't go beyond that. Your buyer has got to set that figure. And I always say to a buyer, I can't decide this for you. You have to decide it. You're the one that's going to be making the payments on this house. You're the one living there. So this is completely up to you. And again, the buyer has to have a plan B. We all know buyers who thought they were going to get what they wanted every single time, and that did not happen. So the buyers need a plan B. And I have had some buyers say, I like this house, but I don't love this house. In which case that means, to me, that signals they probably would be okay if they didn't get it, except for the fact there's not a whole lot of other stuff to look at. Okay, let's go on to our next slide. So the appraiser, when I have that appraiser hat on, I have to prepare a credible appraisal report. We talked about credible. I have to support my value and my adjustments. So I could do 7 hours on adjustments, and I'm not going to do that with you today, and you'll be grateful. But let me tell you this, adjustments are very highly scrutinized in the appraisal process. And if I make an adjustment, I have to be able to prove where I got it. Most adjustments are market-based, not cost-based. So sometimes a consumer will look at an appraisal and say, well, gee whiz, I have a second full bathroom and the appraiser only gave me $3,000 for that, and you can't install a full bath for $3,000, which is absolutely true. You can't. What the appraiser is saying, in this market, in this price range, for this type of house, the typical purchaser, we're going back to that person again, will pay $3,000 more for an additional bathroom. Now, the intended user is the lender. This is such a big deal with appraisers. And I totally understand why buyers are confused, because buyers go in to see their lender. They write out a check for the appraisal and the credit report. When the appraisal is done, they get a copy of the report. That's a federal law. And yet they're not my client. And in fact, I can't talk to the borrower unless my client, the lender, says, yeah, it's okay, you can talk to them. So the intended use is the lender. Intended user is the lender. The intended use is collateral for a loan. Now, on top of USPAP, which we already talked about, which is about yay thick. Is it a Fannie Mae loan? We've got a couple thousand more pages of regulation. Is it FHA? Is it VA? All of those have regs. And then you have particular requirements from a lender. They will sometimes say, we don't want comps that are more than 3 months old. We don't want comps that are more than a half mile from the subject. Now, they say that in areas like where you folks are. If they say that where I am, I just laugh at them because I just can't do that in rural Pennsylvania. I just don't have that level of comparable sales. Let's move on. So on the seller side, I've got two things up there, provable price and aspirational price. So a provable price is what the comps show, and any appraiser should be able to value the house for, the property for. Aspirational price, it's above your CMA. Can't find comps that support it. May get a cash buyer, may get a buyer with extra down money. So let me give you an example of when I used this. I had a client who had a very unique property in a part of my market where we get a lot of second home buyers. Now, she lived in the house year round. The house had 10 acres. It had a pond. It adjoined state land, which is a real big deal in Pennsylvania. It bordered on a rail trail, another big deal. It had deeded access to a creek where you can go kayaking, fishing, all that stuff. So it had a lot of boxes checked for my second home people who are looking for this stuff. I said, here's the price I can prove. Here's the price we might want to ask, because a lot of these second home buyers do pay cash. And if they finance, they don't finance the property they're buying. They do a home equity loan on their existing home. Well, long story short, we didn't get the aspirational price, but she didn't have to go as low as what I thought was the provable price. And on top of that, it went for more than I thought was a provable price. And the guy did a loan on the property and the other appraiser came in. And I was like, okay, I'm keeping my mouth shut. This is none of my business because I didn't represent the buyer. Okay, we're ready to go forward again. Okay, buyer side. So fair market value price for the buyer is what the buyer thinks it's worth. What we think it should be able to appraise for, because if we've got a buyer who needs a loan, there's going to be an appraisal. There are comps that support this price. The upper limit price for the buyer is how high they will go, knowing that that may be above appraised value. That's kind of your line in the sand price. Now, what most of us do when we're negotiating and we're a couple $1,000s apart or 5 or 10 or whatever, and this is a great thing to do all the time, but it's a fabulous thing to do right now when interest rates are so low. We take that difference. The buyer says, I didn't want to have to borrow another $5,000 or I didn't want to whatever. And we reduce it to the ridiculous. We take that, we amortize it at the length of their loan, probably 30 years. We plug in the interest rate they're getting, probably below 3%. It comes out to some absurd small number. Let's just, for sake of argument, I'm going to call it $10 a month. You look the buyer in the eye and say, are you going to lose this house for $10 a month? Are you really going to do that? Because for $10 a month, this can be over. You're in the house. You've got it. Also, by the time we're doing that with a buyer, our buyer has sunk costs. And sunk costs are things we don't get back if we don't proceed. They have paid for an appraisal. They may have had their home inspection done. So if they don't buy this house, not only have they paid those costs, while this house was under contract, they probably weren't looking at other homes. So there you go. We're ready for the next slide. So we all know this, but let's remind ourselves to remind our sellers and buyers. Offers are price, terms, conditions. So everyone, I think, has seen what I have seen. I have seen a seller adjust a price for financing. Cash is king. No inspections. I have flat out said to sellers, and I did this not too long ago with a seller of mine. It was a property that really kind of was a time capsule for 1970. Nothing really major had been done except maintenance. No remodeling, no updating. The wallpaper was the same. Everything was the same. I said, you know, this house probably has more issues than National Geographic when it comes to a home inspector. You get a home inspector in here and they're going to go crazy. We had a contract without inspections. That made the difference. Closing date that suits them. So this becomes a big deal depending upon where people are going. Are they building? Have they purchased another home? Can they not get into that home until this date? And then there's that chemistry with the buyer. So we know sometimes our buyers and sellers know each other. And I have to tell you, over the years, was this the nice young couple with the baby? For some reason, that rings a lot of bells with people. But the chemistry with the buyer can work both ways. So your buyer needs to understand, if you start out with a really low ball offer, you have the potential to really tick the seller off, which means if you come back with a reasonable offer, the seller is going to say to the listing agent, isn't this that jerk who offered me such a low price? And that could mean you don't get a chance to go forward. Now, buyer may have to adjust terms. So my young couple that after 4 contracts finally got a house did not initially listen to me. I'm smiling. The wife of that couple was born 2 weeks after my son was born. Her mother and I are good friends. So I've known her all her life. And I kept saying, Allie, You're either going to get a reduction in price or you're going to get your closing cost assistance. They were going FHA, but you're not going to get both. And they persisted in asking for closing cost assistance and a reduction in price. And every single time until the fourth house, they got shot down. And then the fourth one, they went in at full price with closing cost assistance and they got it. Now, we also may have to say to our buyer, can you prove your ability to pay over appraised value? Because if there are multiple offers, we know that seller's agent is looking at the strength of those buyers. And when the seller says, what do you think? They're going to say things like, well, you know, buyer A has more money down than buyer B. And they may have to forego inspections, decide to do that. Now, there was a great post by an attorney in my state to one of our local associations, and I'll just sum it up this way. Yes, a lot of people are foregoing inspections because of the way the market is. Cover yourself, because people's memories being what they are, if there is an issue later, they're going to say, well, you're the one that told me I shouldn't have an inspection. So I would have some kind of something in writing, possibly a confirming email where, you know, we discussed the fact that I would never advise someone to buy a home without a home inspection. You decided based upon how the market is and multiple offers that you're going to forego the inspection, and that's your choice. And I can't recommend to you that you do that, or words to that effect. Folks, people have really selective memories. And so if something goes wrong with that house after the fact, they won't remember you had a discussion about the pros and cons of an inspection or not an inspection. They will recall that realtor told me I didn't need to have an inspection and I didn't get one done. And now I'm stuck with this huge mess and it's the realtor's fault. We're ready to go forward. So will another appraisal solve the problem? Because sometimes we want to have another appraisal done. Maybe yes, maybe no. So let's talk about maybe yes. Geographic competency remains an issue. And let me explain to you why it's an issue. Once Congress decided to pass Dodd-Frank and do a whole bunch of other stuff, appraisal management companies are in use by almost every lender. Not every lender, some do it internally, but appraisal management companies have as a goal, get this appraisal done quickly, get this appraisal done cheaply. They will have a large panel of appraisers. They will send out a blast email. Here's an appraisal order, this location, this type of appraisal, here's the fee, here's the turnaround time. The most competent local appraiser may very well look at that and say, I don't think so. Not doing it in 2 days, not doing it for that fee. Somebody will eventually take it. That may be the person 3 counties over who doesn't understand the nuances of your market. Or you have a micro market. I've got micro markets all over the place in my area. Now, if there are errors in the report, under Dodd-Frank, an appraiser has to correct errors. So for example, let's just say the appraiser is doing the appraisal late at night and one of the comps sold for $497,000, but they're really tired. So they type in $479,000. Well, not only is that a factual error, that's a factual error that would very much affect the adjusted sales price of that comparable because these numbers are apart. Now, were there overlooked comparables? Now, you see I have there, the lender should have found them. Here's what you need to realize. The lenders for Fannie Mae appraisal are looking at a thing called collateral underwriter. Collateral underwriter is an internal automatic valuation model for the lending industry. It will bring up a map of the subject and comps near it, and it will send that to the lender. The comps will be from public records as well as from MLS. So if there was a comp right across the street that the appraiser didn't use and they didn't comment on why they didn't use it, the underwriter should have picked up on that. They don't always pick up on it. There is no formal training to be an underwriter. which is a very sad thing. Now, maybe this will not solve the problem. Maybe the appraiser does have competency, does know the market, didn't make any mistakes, and the underwriter and the lender agree the comps used were reliable comps. So it could be that it would change things, but maybe it won't. Okay, we're ready for the next slide. So who has the right to appeal an appraisal? Not the buyer's agent, not the seller's agent, not the seller, possibly the buyer. That's the only person who has any standing. The appraiser's client is the lender's client is the borrower, and agents don't have standing unless there's tidewater, which I'll get to in a minute. So the normal way things happen is this. Let's just say I'm the buyer agent. The appraisal goes to my buyer client. They get a copy. And that's a federal financial law. And of course, they don't understand it. So they email me the appraisal they got and they say, hey, Melanie, I don't understand this. Can you explain it to me? Now, let's just assume the appraisal is below negotiated price. And at this point in time, with my client's permission, I'm going to alert the listing agent we have a variance between negotiated price and appraisal, and I'll get permission from my buyer and I'll share the appraisal with the listing agent, who will turn around and share it with the seller. So I understand as an appraiser, once I do an appraisal, who knows who's looking at it. But I can't call the lender and say, this is wrong, that's wrong. I have to make the buyer do that. I basically feed information to the buyer. So it becomes a little bit convoluted, shall we say. Now, if we'll go to the next slide. Appraisal doesn't meet contract price. Well, we all know there's two sides to every story. Seller, that appraiser is an idiot. I won't take 1 penny less. They have to review it and change it. Tony, I'll get to that in a minute, okay? Lender should get another appraiser. Will the seller get her own way? Probably not. Sellers are chopped liver to the lender. As our agents, we got no standing. Buyer, let's renegotiate that price. I like the appraiser's number better. So I'm sure there's people in this webinar that you've had a buyer who said, that's great. I like the price the appraiser had better. They also have the doubt. Am I paying too much for this property? Now, one of the jokers in the deck is we don't know when we're the buyer agent if there is a backup buyer that the listing agent has that they can turn around and go to. But the buyer has to appeal because they have the relationship. Can you put that question up here again? That gentleman asked about, okay, VA appraisal question about leaving off upgrades, any adjustment for gated community versus not gated, or homeowners versus no homeowners. Tony, great questions. So first of all, if I'm going to adjust for an upgrade, I have to be able to prove with market data that the typical purchaser will pay more for that upgrade. So I have to be able to prove that, which often I can. Same thing with a gated community. If I'm in a gated community, I'm pretty much going to use comps within that community. If I have two comparable gated communities, I could use comps from either one of them. If my market recognizes a difference between gated and non-gated, then I absolutely should not use non-gated to gated, or if I absolutely have to, I need to extract that difference and make an adjustment. And I'm kind of getting in the weeds here. I'm sorry about that. Now, homeowner versus no homeowner. So, you know, this will become so particular to your market because we know there's benefits of a homeowner association and there's issues with a homeowners association. So one of the benefits is that a lot of exterior stuff is done and you don't have to pay extra for it and all that good stuff. On the other hand, some people find homeowner associations to get a little bit oppressive. And some people find that homeowner associations are charging what they perceive as a lot of money for what they are actually getting. So the answer in a nutshell is you always circle back to the market. As an appraiser, I have to see what the market tells me. But I'm ready for the next slide. Okay, so VA. VA is your best situation if you find yourself in VA, because there is a thing called a tidewater initiative. And this is a requirement with VA that before the appraisal is uploaded to VA, the appraiser has to give notice to the lender, I'm not coming in at contract price. Your contract price is $375. I'm at $360. I can't get it above there. The lender goes to both the agents and says, okay, we've got tidewater. The appraiser's at $360. Do either of you have comps that will support the value? And the appraiser should consider and comment on them and possibly revise. Under VA, all VA appraisals have always been able to be appealed. What Tidewater does is it moves the appeal process to before when the loan is made. So the appraiser's got to look at them. They've got to consider them. Now, most of the time I have been successful with Tidewater as an agent. I had one this summer where I was not successful. The appraiser in question is a person, I'm just going to say this because it's what he is. His mind is made up. Please do not confuse him with any facts. And the ego is such that if he once said it's worth X, he's never, ever going to change that, which was unfortunate. Now, FHA. FHA appraisals are stick for 4 months. FHA will not order another appraisal on that property for 4 months. So when you list a property and you know your typical purchaser for that property is probably going to go FHA, you need to have a nice long talk with the seller and say, look, if this comes in low, we're stuck with this FHA appraisal for 4 months, which means we either come down to this price or we then have to try to find buyers who are not FHA. But yet, when I analyze the market in your neighborhood, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, most of the homes are selling FHA because of whatever. Now, reviews, VA appraisals, Liz, I think they also stay for 4 months, but I'm not completely sure. FHA does stay for 4 months. Drive-by, yes, it is a lesser appraisal, and a lot of appraisers don't like to do them because you don't know what the interior of the property is. And so I'm sure everyone who's listening to me today has had two kinds of surprises on going into a home. The one is from the outside, it looked great, and the inside was, oh my gosh, awful. Second one was the outside didn't look all that great. You went inside, the inside was fabulous. So the problem I have as an appraiser with a drive-by is I really don't know what's in that house. I don't know what's been done. Now, review appraisals. So a lender can order a review appraisal. An appraisal management company can order a review appraisal. A state appraisal board, upon a complaint, can order a review appraisal. They're done for a variety of reasons. Check the quality. Check the comps that were used. Check for errors. Go ahead and move us forward. How is appraisal on condo with no comps 2-year-old building done? Margie, so all the sales were when the condos were built? Is that what I'm hearing? So I would say this, there ought to be a comparable condominium building which offers condos of the same size and same amenities within the condo project. And that's where most appraisers would go for that. Okay, and we could co-op versus a condo. Isabel, I personally would not necessarily use those as comps for each other. If I were doing a co-op, and we have no co-ops where I live, but I would stick with co-ops because it's a different form of ownership. It's a proprietary lease versus fee simple ownership. So I wouldn't mix those apples and oranges. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, so what is a review appraisal? So it's both a review of the original report and it's a new appraisal report, because under USPAP, even if the review appraiser agrees with the original appraiser, they have to do their own appraisal. They can be done for any of these reasons: quality control, suspected fraud, suspected incompetence, and if there's been a complaint to the appraisal board. And we're ready to go because I'm looking at my clock and saying, I got to get to these couple of other slides. Okay. If there are errors under Dodd-Frank, factual errors must be corrected. Now, some may not change value. Let's suppose somebody put in the wrong census tract number. That's not going to change value. It's just an error. But a lot of errors in a report would indicate carelessness. I don't do reviews anymore, but when I did them, if I saw a number of errors, then my antenna went up that, hey, this person's being rather careless. Let's go on to our next slide. So what should agents do? So if you're the seller agent, meet the appraiser at the property. Traveling appraiser. So this is somebody who contacts you, and the worst case scenario, which you may not have in your market, but many markets do, the listing agent gets a call along the lines of, I don't belong to your MLS. I don't have access to your lockbox. So can you meet me at the property and bring me comps? Hello. It's not the agent's job to bring comps for the appraiser to use. They have to do their own research. In that case, I would stall and I would call the lender and I would say, I have a real concern about this appraiser having geographic competency because he doesn't have access to our MLS. And that's one of the things they should have. Now, you still want to take an appraisal packet. What's in your appraisal packet? Comps you used. Repair and remodeling list, including what was done and when it was done, because there's specific questions on the appraisal report that the appraiser has to answer. Any comps that should not be used. Now, folks, this is huge. So let's say there's a comp that looks normal, but you know the backstory on this comp. House looked fine. They put up decent pictures. Lady lived there with 18 cats. It was a really nasty house. Explain that to the appraiser. Another example of that is here you have a sale. It took forever to sell this house. Well, why? It was a nasty divorce. The original price was crazy high. The spouse in possession refused to allow showings. And when showings were allowed, the house looked horrible. Finally, the legal system proceeded, intervened, and said, you got to sell this house. And at that point, they sold it below market value because they wasted so much time being stubborn and stupid. If I know that as a detail, I'm not using that as a comp, as an appraiser. Now, you also need to prepare your seller if you cannot find comps. You're going to say to your seller, here we are. This is what I got. When you are a listing agent and there's multiple offers, I focus on offers from buyers who can bring more money, have fewer contingencies, and can close in my seller's time frame. Now, we do want to prepare a multiple offer worksheet. And if you advance the slide, I'll show you one of those. Hold on. So it's a slide or so from here. So when you're giving comps to the appraiser, folks, don't give them an apple to an orange, okay? Apples and oranges together make fruit salad. Look at my slide. That's a two-story home. The one on the right-hand side is also a two-story home. It is clearly not a comp. There's a clear difference in square footage, in quality, in materials used, and all that good stuff. And when agents do stuff like this, then the appraiser tunes them out completely. It's like you clearly don't know what you're doing if you're telling me the house on the right is a comp for the house on the left. Okay, we're ready to go. Okay, now, what are appraisers afraid of? See my crazy guy. One sale at a high price could be a crazy buyer and a crazy seller, or as my mother used to say, she was founded the business I'm still running, two fools met, one for asking it and one for paying it. It could be an outlier. It could be not representative of the typical purchaser. So the thing to remember is this: all comps are sales. All sales are not comps. And it goes both ways. You can have a sale at a low price that is not a comp. Let's just say I sold my house to my son. Now, none of the automated valuation models out there would pick up on the fact that it was McLane to McLane and think, oh, gee, this sounds like a family transaction. Maybe it's not a comp. That's why things like Zillow are wrong sometimes, but you've noticed that. Okay, we're ready for the next slide. Okay, wanted you to see this, and I know it's kind of hard to see in your screen, but I did send this presentation on so your folks have it. My state, PAR, Association of Realtors, they love to do forms. And this is a multiple offer summary worksheet. Now, when I use this as an agent, I have the buyer's name and the buyer agent in. The appraisers don't care who the buyer is. They don't care who the buyer agent is. But what the appraiser would look at in this scenario is the purchase price, whether or not there's a seller assist, what the net purchase price is after the seller assist. Is there an escalation clause? How much money was put down? How much money would be followed up for a total down payment? When did they want acceptance? When did they want to close? Was it subject to the sale of another property? Were they getting a mortgage or paying cash? Who was the lender? Some sellers will be more inclined to go with a local reliable lender. What inspections were asked for? What items were included in the sale? Did the buyer ask for things they weren't including? And then any other comments. Now, when you hand something like this to me as an appraiser, it tells me a couple things. It tells me, first of all, you did have multiple offers. Now, I've got the contract, which, by the way, I have the contract because Fannie Mae says I have to have the contract so I can see if there were any seller concessions. I'm going to look at your worksheet. I'm going to look at the contract. And usually it is very, very, very logical to me why the seller took the offer they took. Okay. So for example, I'm saying probably offer number 3 is the one a lot of sellers would take. It's not the highest price, but it's cash. There's no inspections. And look at the comment. Will allow sellers to remain in home for up to 30 days rent-free after closing, because this one wanted to close by the 15th of December. So all of that could be reasons why the seller would take that. Any inspection, we know, any inspection, any financing clause is a door out of the contract for the buyer. Okay, we're ready to go to the next one. Now, this came up on a phone call I had yesterday on the Real Property Valuation Committee for NAR. I'm on that committee. Some agents are lying. I've got my guy with his pants on fire. They are reporting that there are multiple offers, and when they are asked to prove it, they can't. Folks, it's a violation of license law to be dishonest. It's a violation of Article 1 in the code to be dishonest. You don't want to do that. And the parallel to this that I hear about all the time and I've heard about for years are the agents who claim there's going to be multiple offers. You need to get your highest and best in. And sometimes that backfires because what happens is I've got a buyer. I'm told by the listing agent, we're going to be in a multiple offer situation. I tell my buyer this. My buyer says, I just don't want to even get into that. Never mind. It turns out the listing agent was lying. Well, guess what? Now they don't have any offers because they scared my guy away. So short and sweet, we should never lie. We're ready for the next slide. So buyer agents, what are we going to do? First of all, ask the listing agent to let you know when and who the appraiser is. Ask to provide comps for the appraiser. If the seller agent doesn't intend to attend, that's kind of a tongue twister, see if you can. And again, you should have an appraisal packet. Prepare the buyer. If you also cannot find comps, have your buyer revisit again, what's your walkaway price? And buyer, can you compromise on other things? Could we compromise on possession, on closing, on money down? We're ready for the next slide. Okay, so what does an appraiser have to do? So folks, under USPAP, I must consider any and all, I've got a typo in that, it should be any and all market data available to me in the normal course of business. I'm in an open record state in Pennsylvania. That means every transaction is available to me in the normal course of business. I can look it up in public records. Fannie Mae says I must select and use comparable sales which are physically, functionally, and locationally most similar to the subject property. I review the date of the contract for the supply available at that time when I'm looking at a comp. So in other words, let's say a property closed at the end of August, but the contract was written July 1st. I'm going back to July 1st. What else was available on July 1st in that market for that kind of house, because I have to be logical and assume that based on what was available, the buyer made the best decision given what was available. So if the inventory is even lower now, that's going to be the upward pressure on prices. I ask agents for pending comps or comps that are possibly not in the MLS where data can be verified. Now, when you're going to give an appraiser pending comparable information, please get permission from your client. But I've never had a client say no when I've asked them, because they say, well, who's going to get it? And I'm like, the lender. Borrower's going to see it. And, you know, by the time the borrower gets it, we're probably going to have closed because we're pretty close. Appraisers should be open-minded, and it is a fault in the appraisal profession that not all appraisers are open-minded. And of course, be diligent and produce those credible results. We're ready for the next slide. So how do the agents interact in this? Well, if we're in a collaborative situation where we both want this transaction to work, we'll brainstorm, we'll figure out the best comps. Buyer agent will share the appraisal with the seller agent. Now, I want you to think about this. When an appraisal is over negotiated price, buyer agents don't share it. They just say to you, you know what, the appraisal was fine. Now, when the agents are competitive, the seller could have a backup buyer. Maybe the backup buyer came in after this offer was accepted. The buyer has a backup house, or either side is very firmly entrenched. I'm not moving. Or the buyer got cold feet, or the seller thinks they can do better. So this is a sad situation because it's no sale and no commissions, which none of us like at all. Okay, we're ready for the next slide. Now, what if both agents, buyer and seller, all agree the value is low? We've given them comps, pointed out lender errors, and the appraiser has dug their heels in. Maybe we need to find another lender. So I'm going to tell you a true story about this. I had a client who was one of 5 sellers on a property she had inherited. Property was sold, appraisal was done. The appraisal was a hot mess. And it was so bad that I ended up emailing the lender as the broker of the company. My company had handled the sale and said, Jackson Real Estate will pay for another appraisal because I think this one is flawed. And I never use the word review because I'm an appraiser. I don't use that word lightly. That lender got another appraisal. Everything was fine. We closed. Now, fast forward, that same person who was one of 5 siblings is now going to sell her house and buy another house. And we know the house she wants to buy is coming on the market. The people were waiting to get into an assisted living facility. I said to my client, you need to get your ducks in a row and be able to prove that we can go in and pay for this house. And she said, well, I can pull the money out of retirement. And I said, well, you know what? That's not always great. You own your other home free and clear. What about getting a home equity line of credit? So she went to a different local lender and said, I want to get a home equity line of credit so I can buy this house. And the lender said, fine. And the next day, the lender called her and said, hey, the appraisal is set up and so will be coming to appraise your house. Well, guess what? It was the same appraiser who had messed up the appraisal on the house she had inherited. She called me up and said, what should I do? I said, okay, here's what's going to happen. You're going to call the lender and tell her you don't want this appraiser in your property. And she's going to tell you that there's a list of appraisers and her hands are tied. She can't do anything and yada, yada, yada. And I said, you just listen to that for as long as you have patience. That's up to you. I said, and then you say, maybe I need to find a new lender. Well, this woman was widowed. Her husband had a business. All of his business accounts were at this bank where she was getting the loan. The minute she said that, all of a sudden, I'll call you back. And within an hour, she said, not a problem. We've got this reassigned. So never hesitate to be assertive. I'm ready for the next slide. Okay, I wanted to get here. My clock says it's 11:03, so I've kept you past time. I have a website. Where I'm going to be is on my website. I have a Facebook page, and all I ever put there is stuff about real estate. And I posted this morning about some mortgage fraud in Pennsylvania, and I sometimes other things that are of interest. I will answer any other questions. I've had a great time being with you folks today.
Hey, Melanie, it's always good to see you. I appreciate you being on. Do you have time for just 2 questions?
Absolutely. I have time for as many as you like.
Okay, awesome. One question. What can we do as listing agents to help our listings value?
So, Deborah, you're going to circle back, do a good CMA. You want to look at it the way an appraiser is going to look at it. So an appraiser is not going to use, if possible, comps that are older than 6 months. So if your seller is saying, hey, there's that great comp right down the street, and it sold a year and a half ago, no one's going to be able to use that comp. So try to focus on what an appraiser would use. You can get all the Fannie Mae guidelines at allregs.com. But here's something else, folks. Make friends with an appraiser. Everyone needs to be friends with an appraiser because there's a lot of stuff they can help you with. Just saying.
That's awesome. Are bedrooms and baths given the same weight when they are below grade, such as fully finished basements?
No. Fannie Mae divides living space between above grade and below grade. Finishing off your basement is the cheapest way to add square footage to your home, which is why so many people do it. But Fannie Mae guidelines are if any part of that level is below grade, the whole level is considered to be below grade. So if you think of a split entry home where you walk out at grade level at the back, there's doors to a patio. But when you turn around and face the front of that house, I'm doing my hand here, the sill of the window is right about here on me. And then there's dirt outside that window. Fannie Mae says that's below grade. So they get some weight, but not all weight. And the other thing to watch, Edith, is building code now requires that basement bedrooms have egress to the outside, which is the full-size window and that funny little half circle thing with a ladder. If they haven't built it to have egress, that's code.
Got it. Personal question from me. How do you price outdoor space? Think of a condominium that may have like a 300-400 square foot terrace, which is rather unusual in the city, but it does exist.
That's a great question. I personally would think that would add value, but I'm a big fan of outdoor spaces. But what the appraiser has to do is locate comps that will support that. And Charlie, the other thing that's really interesting, there's actually been, when there's enough data, you could do a lot of fun things. So there's been data about how much more people in a condo will pay for a view. Mm-hmm. You know, and how upper floors sometimes get better prices because the view is better. Right. But you have to have an appraiser who knows what they're doing. It all comes down to the comps. And the competence. And the comps and the competence. I like that. Not everyone is equally competent. Very good. I think we'll leave it there since we're running over. Okay. This video will be available later. We'll send out the link to everybody that attended. Melanie, it's been a real pleasure. I appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us, and I hope to have you back again soon. I would love to come back, and I would love to have that link if you don't mind. No problem. Take care. Have a great day. You guys have a wonderful day. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.